This is going to help you master the crop tool in and out. The reason I'm making this is because I'm fairly new to Photoshop. Just started this year, but I've mastered some of its features, and just from my own experience of watching the tutorials, I was very displeased with how either very basic they are or how advanced they are and they don't show you all the steps. But essentially, none of the ones have covered all the features of the crop tool, and I'd like to share that with you now. So before we get started, you're going to see some silly pictures. That's because I created a meme page. Why did I create one? Because that's how you get girls nowadays. It's at MemeMimeKing. You can follow it on Facebook and Instagram. And honestly, I created it because I'm new to Photoshop, and I wanted to stay entertained and stay motivated to keep learning it. So I decided the best way is to do something that's fun, and I think memes are fun, so whatever. I goof around on them. So anyways, let's get to it. So in order to get to the crop tool, you have your toolbar over here. You can either click this icon here, and once you do, you'll be able to crop. You'll see this frame here. It's a cropping frame. You've seen it in other applications, I'm sure that you've used crop with. They have something similar. So that's basically the frame of the crop tool. Now to exit this, all you have to do is click escape. Sometimes you have to click it twice, because if you click it once, it goes to the frame of the picture. You click it twice and it disappears. You could go to another tool. Now another way to access the crop tool is by pressing C on your keypad, and using shortcuts is very helpful in Photoshop. Once you're playing around with Photoshop a lot, you don't want to keep clicking, going to the menus and this and that. It's much easier to just hit C, boom, we're in the crop tool. So now what I'm going to do here is I'm going to go and explain what all of this is up here. Now whenever you use a tool, you usually get a bunch of options up here, and that's basically the scope of how you can use the tool. So if something is checked like this, that means it's active. And if it's unchecked, it means it's inactive. So as we progress through here, I'll explain what all of these mean. Let's start with this one. So what this one is saying is it's saying ratio. Now what that allows you to do is choose the ratio of this frame. By the way, ratio does not mean inches or pixels, it just means the ratio. So for instance, if you want the ratio to be 4:2, all of a sudden this becomes 4:2. And regardless where I drag with it, if I drag on the side, if I drag in a corner, it'll always stick to the ratio of 4:2. Again, it's not 4 inches by 2 inches, and it's not 4 ppi by 2 ppi, which is pixels per inch in Photoshop. So let's do something like 1:1. A lot of you use Instagram, and usually it's a 1:1 ratio there. So as you can see, you can expand and you can shift it around as you like. Afterwards, you can even move it around like this by just clicking and dragging with it. Another way to do it is to not. So there's one important feature I'd like to go over, and that's the target right here. Now the reason you see the target in this box is because when you're going down and up, it's kind of just doing it based on how you're dragging it. But let's say we want this head to be the center, and whenever you expand or contract the selection, it expands or contracts around this head. So what you would do is you would move this target onto the head, and then you would hit Alt, and while pressing Alt, if you zoom in and out, it zooms in and out relative to where the head is. So for instance, now I've kind of centered it. So if I zoom in or if I zoom out, it's going to center it to that point. Now if I let go of the Alt, it no longer does that. Another important thing about ratio is if you set it to say 4:2, now it'll stick to 4:2 like this, but if you go too much, it sometimes switches to vertical now 4:2 instead of horizontal. So you have to be mindful of that. So what other options do we have here? We can set the ratio. We can set the width, height, and resolution. That's a little more advanced. I rarely ever see any use for that. You could go to original ratio, and the original ratio will simply, it's what you started out with when you hit the crop tool. There's preset ratios here. That's all these numbers mean. There's also you could choose the pixels per inch. So sometimes you're working, you know exactly how many pixels are in a picture and you want to be exact. That's when you would use something like this. You see 8.5 by 11. That's the size of a regular sheet, and it basically it'll conform to whatever you choose it to conform under these features. There's also unconstrained, which means unconstrained, you can now manipulate it any which way you want, and it's not constrained to anything. And one final one is you could create your own crop preset. So if you click this, it gives you the options, you follow the directions, and you could basically create your own preset, which will show up just like these do here. Now, one other important thing to mention is sometimes the snap is on. Now, what the snap feature does, you can see this by going to View and checking if the snap is on. Sometimes Photoshop automatically has the snap on. So if you see I clicked snap, now the check mark is next to it, which means the snap is on. If I'm moving this around, if I come close to a border, all of a sudden it snaps to it and it snaps up. You might not be seeing what I'm doing, but if I'm moving the mouse slowly, all of a sudden it snaps to it. But if I just want it to be mildly cropped, it's not going to allow me because it snaps. So what you have to do is you go to View and you turn off snap, and then you're completely unconstrained to do as you wish with the crop tool. Now, another important thing to note is that if you go outside of the crop, you can actually rotate the image. So you can rotate it. So, but that gets tricky because if you rotate an image and if you go outside an image, now let's say we rotate it like this because we want the deer to be more straight. So parallel to the ground, its legs parallel to the ground. So if we do this and we now crop, by the way, cropping, you could press enter or you could press this check mark here to complete your crop. This cancels your crop operation, and this is basically a reset the crop box, reset what you were doing before. So if I hit enter right now, so I hit the check mark, and we see that we now have this empty space here. Now we will see how we can fix that. Whereas we couldn't before, now in the Photoshop 2017 version, you can actually fill that area with content-aware fill. But we'll get to that later. So to go back, you can either, actually the best way to do it is to just go to Edit, Undo Crop, or Control-Z. So if you hit Control-Z, we're back to where we were. There's also ways to access it through the history, to go back to it, but that's a little more advanced. I mean, just Control-Z, it's the best way to do it. It's the easiest way to do it. So let's stick to a 1:1 ratio, and let's see what else we have here. So as we go down the list, this you can manually input. So let's say I input 4:2. If I hit this button here, all it does is it transfers it. So whereas it was 4:2 horizontally, where it was longer horizontally, now it'll be longer vertically. So now you're switching it to 2:4. It basically just switches these two numbers. Clear completely clears the numbers out, and you could start over again if you wish. But let's just leave it 1:1 for now. Now let's get to the straighten feature. This is a very, very interesting feature. Now let's see. Let me manipulate this image a little bit. So by the way, as you see, if I'm cropping on a specific ratio, Photoshop is smart enough to not go outside of the barriers of the image where there are actually unfilled pixels. So, but you'll get a smaller space that you can crop. But let's say we want to crop this. So again, I could just hit enter once or twice, or I could click that checkbox that was here. So let's say we did this. Let me actually go back and crop it a little bit better. Another way to crop is to just hold and drag your mouse, and then you can crop that way. But I'll show you why I'm recropping it. I just wanted to show you guys a very interesting feature there, the straighten feature. So this is the next feature that we're at. It's the straighten. So if you hit this box right here, you are now working with the straighten feature. You'll see a new icon. It looks like a little briefcase. So what you can do here is you can click on a certain part of the picture. So let's say I want to make these legs perfectly parallel to the horizontal surface. So parallel to the floor. How I can do that is I can click, and after I click, I hold the mouse and I drag. If I drag this out and then I click again where the two hooves of the deer are kind of aligned and I let go, it'll actually straighten the image for me. Now, the reason I'm seeing the rest of the image here is because we haven't completely destroyed it. And there's a way to do that by clicking this box, which is, it determines if the pixel data is retained or deleted outside the parameters of what we're cropping. But let's go tool by tool, so let's stick to the straighten tool. So it's showing us a preview of it. You could see here it says crop preview. And if you're happy with it, you press enter. And if not, you basically revert back by clicking this revert box, and again you could click straighten, and let's straighten that again. So let's say we weren't exact and now we want to be exact and we're happy with how it is now. I can again click enter or the checkbox up here, and it will actually straighten the image for you. This is very helpful when you have horizontal lines, or you've taken an image outside maybe of the beach and you see where the sky is meeting the sand. It's not completely straight, but it's in an angle. You can literally just run that straighten line across the horizontal line and it will fix it for you, which is very helpful. Again, so now that we have that, now to go back to how it was, you can either click edit undo a bunch of times. There's also another shortcut of Control-Alt-Z. In Photoshop, if you hit Control-Z, it'll only let you backstep once. But if you hit Control-Alt-Z, you can backstep as many times as you want until you get back to where you would like to be. So now let's move on to the next one. What is this showing us here? It's a little grid. It looks like a little checker chess thing. Again, Photoshop can be very intimidating sometimes, because if you open this up and you have no idea what the hell this is, then you will be like, whoa, grids, diagonals, triangles, this is way too crazy. But it's actually very simple. All this is telling you is what it'll show inside the grid when you go to crop. So again, if I go to crop something, so now I'm going to crop and I see a whole different layout here. As I'm moving this, so sometimes when you're not moving it, it just shows you the actual picture to not interfere with it. But as you're moving, you see all these checkered boxes, and you can basically choose that design. So for instance, if I choose this quirky triangle design, and now I shift it in, I see a triangle pattern in here as I'm shifting it. By the way, keep in mind what we've learned about the target. You can move it wherever you want. You have to press Alt. You'll see that symbol next to the mouse, and then you move this, and it will crop relative to where you have that target placed. Okay, so there's also always show overlay, never show overlay. So now if I'm moving it, it'll never show anything in there. It's very self-explanatory. Cycle overlay, it's basically cycling through these things if you click O. So if I'm pressing O, it'll actually cycle through all of these now. Because I've chose cycle overlay, you could take that off. Honestly, I prefer working with the rule of thirds or the actual grid, but I can see scenarios where you would need the others as well. Okay, so now that we've covered some of that, let's now cover one other thing. If you're working with so if you haven't set your parameters on the crop, and it's pretty free to transform here. Now, let's say you just want to crop this sign, this New York City sign of crazy pedestrians that I made, which I don't know if any one of you has ever driven New York City, but these pedestrians are getting out of control. Okay, so let's say you're cropping like this now. By the way, it's very helpful that if you're trying to move it to the middle, it sometimes just snaps to the middle. Even though, do we still have snap on? No, we have snap off. But so you don't get confused if you're trying to go back to the middle, Photoshop brings it back to the middle for you, and you don't have to worry. Is it in the middle? Did I not? Should I measure with rulers or whatever? Okay, so let's say we're cropping this sign. Again, let's this time hit the check mark instead of enter. Now, let's say I'm going to Control Z, and let's say I wanted to crop around this sign, but I wanted some space around the sign itself. So the way to do that, but I wanted to keep these exact dimensions. So if you hit Shift, if you press and hold Shift while you're moving this crop, you'll see that it sticks to the ratio that you had. So for instance, if I create a crazy ratio like this, and then I start to move this out, it's not going to move it out evenly. It's going to move it out how I'm moving the mouse. But if I hold Shift and I start dragging this out from the corner, it'll stick to the ratios that I've created. If you don't believe me, you could take those width and height inch parameters that you see changing there. You could divide them and you'll get the same exact number every time you do it. But we all know how much people love math, and there's no reason to do that shit. Okay, so let's now get to the settings option here. Now, what does this settings option do? This is, it's basically showing you when you crop, what is it going to show you in the background? So do you want it to show you the cropped area? Do you want it to show you the crop field? So for instance, let me start cropping here. So do you see how dim this area is, and this is showing you what the crop preview is like? So even if I twist it, you see the other part is dim. We could change that if we wanted to by if you take away the enable crop shield, you'll now always see a clear image of it. This might be helpful if the image is very dim and you kind of want to see the surroundings. But as you see, this is now the same exact brightness as inside. So let's check out some more features this setting has. If you enable the crop shield, you can choose, do you want it to match the canvas? Do you want it to be a custom color? So let's say it's this color here. Now it's a whole different shade of color in the background. Now let's just stick to match canvas. Opacity is important. What opacity is how clear or how transparent this will be. So 100% means it'll completely match the back of the canvas and you won't be able to see anything. 0, on the other hand, or let's try 1%, will keep it pretty much as if you take away the enable crop shield. So what 50 does is it's basically meeting in the middle where it's dimming it quite a bit so you can see the contrast between what you're cropping and what you're not cropping. Is it really important? I think the preset that Photoshop has is sufficient enough for everything you need. Auto center preview is it's not super important, but if you can play around with it, and if you like that vision better, you can go ahead and do that. Show the cropped area. So again, if you unclick that, and there's the classic mode. I don't know why you would use the classic mode. I see absolutely no. It's kind of as Photoshop progresses from one version to the next, they try to keep it a smooth transition. So they basically keep the settings so that old people don't get freaked out when they're going to a new version. Again, what does this do? So I briefly mentioned it before, but if you click this, so this is the content. This basically determines if the pixels outside the picture are going to be saved or not. So if you click this and you want to crop this and you have this on, it will permanently delete whatever you had around it. So for instance, if I do this and now I try to shift this picture around, so let's convert it to a normal layer. If I try to shift this picture around, there's nothing behind it at all. So there's nothing around what I've cropped. Those pixels are dead. Let me go back again. Control Alt Z, Control Alt Z, Control Alt Z brings you back. to what you were originally doing it. If you tried just doing Control Z, it wouldn't work. It would just go one step back and then would revert it to where you were. So now let's try to crop it. So, okay, so let's go back to our crop tool. Again, it was asking us to create it to a normal layer because the background gets funky sometimes. If you don't take that lock symbol off, it doesn't allow you to do certain things. And it does that so you don't mess up your original image, but I think we're all mature enough where we can play around with it, and just make sure you have a backup saved somewhere. Okay, so let's say we're cropping this, right? And let's say we have this not on. So to not have it on, you have to unclick it so it's not shaded. And now we hit enter. So now this is cropped, but let's see if the surrounding pixels are actually deleted. Now go to your move tool. This is your move tool right here. I can explain it in a different tutorial if you wish. So if you start moving this around, now you see that we didn't lose those pixels. Those pixels are still there, they're just hidden. Whereas if you so again, if I go back, by the way, let's just see what happens with the Control Z and Control Z. So if I leave this here, and if I go to if I try to go back to our original state by just clicking Control Z, it'll bring me back here, but then it'll bring me back to where I was a second ago. It only goes back once. That's why we have to do Control Z, and we can get back to it again. You can even see we could click Control Z again, and it'll bring back the original lock on this background photo because that's how it was originally. Okay, so I'll take the lock off again, and let's now go to my personal favorite feature in the crop function, and that's the content aware fill. For this, I'm going to go to another meme of mine. I'm shamelessly advertising my memes here. By the way, I know this is ridiculous. Some of you will be offended by it. If I think of something funny, I'm going to create it. I don't care on which political affiliation it fits into. Me personally, I don't affiliate with a political side, but if I think it's funny, I'm going to do it. This is Moses in a Trump hat, parting his hair, and basically just goofing on the whole thing. Okay, so what we're going to do here, for the sake of this, I'm going to get rid of the letters here. So I'm going to crop out the letters because when I'm going to show you, it could get confusing because the letters are close to the barrier. Okay, so let's crop this out. Again, let's just do it by hitting enter. So let's pretend we have this image here, but you go to crop the image, and you know what? You actually want to expand it. Oh, by the way, we see what we had there before because we didn't hit this, which would permanently delete it. For the purpose of this video, I want to permanently delete it. And again, I see some space there, so let me delete that white space as well. Okay, so what I'm going to show you is how so I'm going to first of all turn this off, and now I'm going to turn on this content aware fill area outside the original space. This is magical. So if you have barriers where it's basically just nothing complex, but a design that's been going on for a little while, so no letters or no groovy stuff here, it's just nature. So we see the sky here. Let's say I want to crop it and I want to expand it this way. So normally, if I was to crop it, I would see this dead pixel space here. However, what Photoshop has done is with this feature here, if I click it and I crop it, it will actually fill in this area with what it considers a continuation of the image. Pretty much close to Houdini type work. Now let's see if this is a good fit. It's not a good fit for all pictures, but let's see if this will work. So I'm going to hit this here, it's now checked, and I'm going to go to this check mark, and when I press it, it should fill the sky left and right to what I've cropped to. Let's see if it does that. Boom. Check out how amazing that is. Almost seamless. If this is the first time you're seeing this, you might not even see anything strange in here. It kind of just expanded the picture and filled it in. And this is very helpful for when you're sometimes, let's say you're trying to rotate crop and it kind of cuts your picture out. Let's say this was all nature. If I wanted to still keep this ratio and I crop the image like this, I can try to fill it in. Now, do you see what Photoshop did here? It kind of plays around with the pixels that were already there and tries to fill in based on some complex algorithm. That's why, since we were close, since this is close to the edges and the way we were cropping, it kind of took the data from this image and tried to fill it in. That's why sometimes it's just not the best way to continue to fill in your image, but sometimes it works brilliantly. Sometimes you get a cool design. I mean, this might be a cool way to do it too. But anyways, I hope this helps. I'm very thankful to the tutorials I have watched. I didn't mean to take a shit on them in the beginning of this video. But again, they don't go over all of these features. And even though we didn't go advanced, I feel like if you're now using Photoshop, hopefully this is like less than 1/10 of 1% of what Photoshop is. But now if you go to the crop tool here, you can say with affirmative decision that you know how to use this crop tool here. Now I'm going to try to keep making these videos. I'm going to try to promote different things. But for now, I am promoting my meme page at MemeMimeKing. As I get better at Photoshop, these memes will get better. They will get funnier. They might be slightly insulting. Don't show it to your grandma. Follow me on Facebook. Follow me on Instagram. I'm not asking for any donations. I am asking for some followers. That's why I put some time into this video. And I hope you guys enjoy it. I love creating. I love people who create, and I hope that you don't get discouraged with how complex Photoshop is. I got discouraged when I started it, and I said, no, I'm not going to give up. I'm going to create these like crazy, silly ideas I have in my mind, and I'm going to put them to real life, and I'm going to make people smile and laugh, and I'm going to teach people how to use Photoshop. Alright guys, that's pretty much it. Now you can take this to your local bar, show the girl, the guy next to you, that you know how to use the crop tool, get their number. That's how it works. Boom. At MemeMimeKing. Thanks for watching.